Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is the Marion City Council work session, Tuesday, November 19th, 2019. I just want to start by saying thank you to the council and all our staff who attended the special work sessions for strategic planning last week, 2 full days, and I'm just very proud to be part of this team, and it was just great to come up with a plan or the beginnings of a plan that's going to guide us through the next few years. And thank you, everybody, for all your hard work. It's really great to be part of this team. Okay, we'll start with roll call.
Mr. Draper?
Yes.
Ms. Atkins? Mr. Jensen?
Here.
Mayor Abu Osley?
Here.
Mr. Sternad?
Here.
Mr. Brandt?
Here.
Ms. Gedalia?
Okay, thank you. First on our agenda marked for discussion is a presentation regarding City Hall space analysis. We have Sarah Coleman with Martin Gardner Architecture. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thanks for letting me come in today. Early this spring, I was tasked with the problem of taking a look at the existing City Hall and the current spaces, as well as what the future space needs might be for this building for the next 2 to 5 years. So I started out this by meeting with every department head individually, kind of getting their feedback on what their staffing needs are currently, as well as looking that 2 to 5 years into the future. And then with that, kind of set out some goals for City Hall itself, mainly looking at from a security standpoint. There has been a couple of situations where police has been required to kind of de-escalate a couple of situations and trying to keep staff so that they feel safe working in this building. So security was kind of the top priority. Then I also looked at the building from a standpoint of who comes to City Hall, what services are they looking for, and how can we get them to their answers as quickly as possible. And so I kind of looked at City Hall from a standpoint of what generates the traffic flow of patrons to the building and how the building might answer those questions a little faster. And so basically what I did was the first things you're going to look at is just colorized plans of what's here currently, with yellow being conference room spaces, the pink being Medco chamber, red is the executive department, light blue is water department, light green is finance, dark green is engineering. First and second floors, and then second floor also has orange, which is IT. And then kind of I started playing what I'm calling upset the fruit basket. Where can I get these departments so everybody is secure in their working environment and the departments are as quickly accessible to patrons as possible. And by looking at that, it kind of became obvious to me that the community development and the building services department and water department are kind of the ones that generate the most traffic flow into City Hall. So trying to get them onto the first floor was kind of my original goal, as well as getting them in a secure area. So I'm kind of looking at everything that's behind the counters over there is what I'm calling back of the house. So basically anything beyond that, you need to have access to get to those areas of the building. Because right now, if people know the floor plan, they can kind of get in here and go wherever they want. There's nothing that's really stopping you, even from a passive security standpoint, other than there's a door there that kind of tells you you really should have permission to go beyond this point. And then looking at upstairs, to get the spaces I needed downstairs, executive department and finance department would move upstairs. Engineering and IT would pretty much stay where they're currently located. And really, using our existing furniture, we have enough square footage right now in the building with the creation of a couple little offices here and there and some tweaks to keep this building usable for the foreseeable quick future. And then really projecting out that 2 to 5 years, you'll see I start solving this problem with some different open office furniture. So this day and age, the square footage that you get in a cubicle has gone down. And so by using those kind of current philosophies when it comes to square footage per employee, you can make the building usable. going back to first floor, really the main goal then would be getting the current desk space behind a secure wall with bullet-resistive glass at your kind of transaction points. As well as these little red squares you'll see, they're really tiny on the big screens here. That would be key fob access, so we'd be adding some lock points that you'd have to have key card access to get behind. So again, that's getting you back of the house. You'd already have kind of a permission to get to those points. Questions?
Questions?
I'm glad we're going to be able to use the same building. That's a good thing.
Right, and considering back in 2006, this building was designed to have another floor put onto it. Right now, I'm projecting out that we can make this building work without going to those kind of extremes.
Mayor, I think your office is in the closet now?
Yeah,
Is that where
he
it's at?
did get switched over to the other side where there's currently a storage closet that allowed us to have more office space that was in that back of the house area, as I'm referring to it.
I like the idea about getting the departments that really create the traffic, because I'll sit in here once in a while and I watch the traffic and a number of people, especially in the building department and planning, going up and down the stairs and
that's cyclical too. So like this time of
Exactly.
year, as people are trying to finish up those building permits, you're going to see a lot of traffic going up there. Then they'll have a lull through the winter, and then all of a sudden, right before everybody's getting ready for spring construction, that traffic flow going back upstairs picks right back up again.
The other aspect I like is, again, I do like I like keeping the chamber and Medco in this building as long as we can. And I know they understand that that may not always last, but I think there's a benefit certainly to the community. One of the key things we talked about in our strategic planning was an emphasis on economic development and looking at that area. And so having them, they are the economic development arm of the city, and having them here, I think, helps in that communication and talking about projects. The thing that surprises me in looking at this is it doesn't look like they have a whole lot more space
They
in
really
the revised
don't.
area than what they have currently, and so
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. In
it
fact,
seems really tight.
I checked the numbers 3 different times because when you look at this long narrow, you think that's not very much square footage.
Yeah.
And then when you look at them in this pink kind of L-shaped where the executive suite is right now, it's basically the exact same square footage. What they would benefit from on this particular layout is with some key fob access to like this back door here, they would have access to a restroom of their own, as well as we could get another entrance on the south side so that they could have access to this building off hours from when City Hall itself would be open.
So this
Because right now with where they're at, City Hall has to be open for them to be open because you need access to the restrooms.
So this accommodates their current staff level,
Yes.
but probably does not allow.
It is not allowing
For
them
any
the
growth.
growth. Yes.
So to me, that's still
An
the
issue.
question mark I have on this. On how otherwise, I think some of the mixture looks pretty well.
And really, one of the things that they could look at, and I know they're kind of a joint group, but
Right.
one thing we could look at is if Medco or Chamber, it's the combination of the two that's really hurting how much square footage they're getting squeezed. I acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And that's honestly, Councilman Jensen, been one of the hardest things to deal with, because I think as the chamber looks forward, if Prospect Meadows tourism numbers come about, I mean, the chamber visibility being somewhere that's accessible for CVB type functions
Yeah.
could become a lot more important. And so that, of course, means the 6th Avenue side frontage is valuable, but that's almost impossible to do with the way the building is laid out in that rear stair.
Yeah.
We looked at several different permutations and just couldn't come up with something between the vault and the stairs that made sense to make it work.
Yeah, and I know you're just seeing a snapshot of like, this is by far shaking out to be the best solution at the moment. I did look at, when you're looking at this particular layout here, where that dark blue is, what can we do to try and get an entrance over on that 6th Avenue side? And they ended up with less square footage than what they've got now.
There were a couple of options that we looked at for council chambers as well, which I alluded
Yes.
to when you were talking about when we started looking at the RFPs for doing the AV in here. One of the things that we've observed over time is that by having the conference room back there and having it separated, we don't routinely change the layout of the tables or anything because it's used as a conference room throughout the day. But you can end up with a lot of conversations happening back there, and I've had folks in the audience comment that that's distracting to be having people behind you having independent conversations with city council. And we've also had, as the community grows, larger meetings more frequently in the past. So what we looked at was how could we increase the capacity of this room for public use, but then also as we've grown and as we have more department heads regularly attending the meetings, you have some that are up here and some interspersed throughout the audience. How do we make sure that the staff is all in areas where you have kind of equal access to the city council as well? So a couple of different ways that we looked at that. One that was what I'd call an incremental change from the existing way that we use it, and then the other one that I've called the nuclear option. I've asked Sarah to cover those a little bit as well.
Yeah, I kind of, and my terminology was a major renovation and a minor renovation. So the minor, what I'm trying to do right now, what's kind of squeezing your audience is the two side desks here. So working with Lon, we kind of looked at there are 4 key people to try and keep as close to the council as possible, that being Lon, city attorney, police chief, and city clerk. So keeping 4 close by and then relocating what's going on back there so that there was permanent desk space for each of the department heads. So they had kind of an assigned seating, but they aren't necessarily as close to the audience. They'd have to do what I'm doing here. That if they did need to present, they'd come up and talk at the lectern. But that would be what it's doing, is it's allowing us to get more seating up close to you guys. And let's see. I can't read it in that tiny square footage, but I'll give you a quick numbers here. In this minor option, I've got seating for 80 people then in the audience. Then in the major renovation, taking a look at if that back area is completely going away, what can we do to try and bring you as the council closer to the audience as they're coming in which case then we'd look at what if the dais was here, and when you're coming in from those main doors, then the seating kind of erased from there, and the elevated area where you guys are now would become kind of the staffing location. And what was nice about this one is it kept all the staff, not just the key 4, but everybody kind of feels like they're treated equally in that. But that was slightly less chairs. It's 76 seats, so I mean it's not a huge difference, 4 versus 4 seats total. And this option would allow us, we could squeeze, if it was going to be a big meeting and we knew that there's opportunities for some more chairs that way. This one we do have to get a little creative if Medco chamber ends up in the pink areas they're shown. Right now this is also a back exit from this room in case of an emergency, so having temporary access through their space in an emergency situation. But again, we could take care of that with like delayed egress hardware, so you can't get in there unless it's truly an emergency.
Okay. So what's the timeline on making decisions here?
There's nothing in here that I would consider to be hugely pressing for the city council, especially in here. I think as we'll see with the new technology, it's going to be a lot more adaptable than the stuff that we have now that all has to be hardwired. The first project that we would look at would be renovations to the public-facing portion of the building. I know since we started working on this project, the water department has made at least some preliminary decisions about where they'll be heading. That's going to lessen the pressure on the building as far as numbers of staff, but it also means that we could potentially only have to renovate one customer service center rather than looking at doing them on both floors at least right away. So the next stage would be to get some costs together, and if the council's amenable to it, look at how those might fit into the CIP and projects in the future.
And I did take a look at that from a really high level, like basically a cost per square foot over focusing on the desk and the security from that standpoint. And I'm looking at somewhere in the range of 117,000 to 146,000, focusing on that front desk security area. And that was with a level 3 bullet resistive glass. So bullet resistive glass goes up to a level 8. And so level 3 takes three shots from a 9mm versus when you get up to like the 5 and 6, then they'll take a shot from an AR-15. But dollars go up with that.
Sure.
I don't know if I have a question or a comment about that. It's just a lot of information.
Yeah.
No. I just kind of quick observations here, taking a look at changing the council chambers around a little bit. I don't know if I'd be as in favor of moving the staff all the way to the one right side, moving council down here. It means that you would be addressing everything to your right-hand side. It's balanced, that's just an observation. Does it really, if I'm looking at the plan here, all joking aside, the mayor's office, would we be proposing moving the actual entrance over?
Yeah, but I would probably move the entrance so it was from the lobby side versus so basically the entrance now would be about the same place as where the door to the storage closet itself is. Now, whether or not we'd want to put a window in there so that he's visible from the vestibule, and then in which case we could look at moving the door to the vestibule.
I was just thinking of it from a cost expense standpoint, because that's major construction, right? We're talking about physically bricking the building, cutting a new hole. I just want to make sure the return on investment is
Right.
balancing there. In my mind, it's a lot of the cost, but is there truly that much benefit that would offset the difference of that? The other thing too, this would be just a comment for the mayor or the city manager, and that is I would hope that in our reorganizing, I know in our process that we always think that we should have somebody from city manager's office at that front desk at the lower level. They really should be the concierge to the city hall. Now, who that is doesn't matter, but in my mind, that's been an ongoing battle and concern that a department is handling those general questions up front, and really it should be coming from the city manager's office as opposed to putting that burden onto one department. So I would hope that we would reconsider and take a look at that person, where they sit, and what their duties would be per day, but being that frontline person, when somebody just walks in off the street, doesn't know where they're looking for and where they're headed, that concierge person needs to be a city manager's office representative as opposed to a department, so we can get rid of some of those labor-intensive items that are bogging down some of those areas. So anyway, just a couple comments, but thank you. The drawings look great, and I'm very excited to look forward as we put those protections into place. One last thing, I'm sorry, there was one thing I wanted to ask you specifically. Would we be incorporating all interior doors moving from one category of the building to another? Would those be behind a fobbed locked door with a fob entrance in and out each time, so that we do try to segregate that general public from not being able to impede into the rest of the building and in areas that we don't have a direct line of sight?
Yes. So basically that wall and security doors would be a fobbed entrance, as well as your entrance from the parking lot. And depending, looking clear down 5 years from now, if we digitize and clean up some of our storage area downstairs, there would be the potential of getting some conference space down there, in which case that entire back stairwell on the east side of the building would need fobs at each floor, because then you wouldn't want somebody to be able to get down to that basement conference area space and be able to work their way up into the back of the house, as I'm referring to it.
Perfect, and that's exactly what I was looking for. I was hoping we would have some of more of that limitation for general public access. We have been kind of a very trusting community up until now, and so I'd like to be on the front side of that, so thank you.
And Randy, one thing I would say that it's subtle, it's hard to tell in the drawing on this scale, but with the layout that Sarah has proposed for the counters downstairs, that center one in the dark blue actually projects out past the front of the counter. So someone walking in would see, you'd have kind of that prominent desk that would draw someone to walk right up to that one as kind of your central contact point for the building.
That's
Especially if we
perfect.
use some kind of different colored paint or something along those lines that really helps differentiate. This window is different from the other ones.
Yeah, that'd be great, because the only other thing is to put them in a circle right out in the middle of the lobby,
Right,
but
and I
obvious-
did look at, do we put an info person that could be a retiree or something that they're employed from 9 o'clock to 4 o'clock, the main traffic times. But then I'm like, I'm looking at this from a security point, and I'm putting them smack dab in the middle out in the open.
Right. No, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate that little bit, because those are little bitty details that make big differences. Thanks.
Yeah, just a comment about the council chambers. So again, I also, I was looking at the minimum one, would not be interested in having a number of people we talked to
Clear back there.
clear back there. And if I look at it from an overall aspect, that the way it is set up today, I understand the balance point, and if we talk about that the public doesn't have enough seating, again, we can always change the type of seating in the back, but even if we had nothing back there, the amount of seating here accommodates at least 90% of the meetings. So I always believe, you don't change everything for a small number of meetings, but you make sure you do it the best way to make you most efficient and accommodate the majority of the meetings. And in my opinion,
Majority
this
of the
accommodates
meetings
that
keeping-
just fine right now. So,
Well, in our joke beforehand, it's like church, who sits in the front row unless you come in late and have to.
yeah, there may be some rearranging, or I'm assuming whatever we going forward, that the unit here will be a little more efficient and built, smaller, and, with the new technology that may come. And so I'm assuming that's all going to be streamlined and look better. But again, if people want it, it's like a church. People don't sit in the front area. They always sit in the rear. I'm the same way. I understand that. And back there, gosh, I could put my arms on the table and rest it and have my laptop out and do whatever. So I understand why it's the way it is today, but it works the majority of the
nature.
time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess in my 7 years up here, I remember one time where the room wasn't big enough to fit everyone for a meeting, and that was a very special case. But anyway, my question to you is, you said you were going to get estimates, and do we need to make decisions on preferences before you get estimates, or you're just going to get estimates?
Well, if we could get things narrowed down so that what I'm putting together for opinions of costs, I know isn't, right now, I've got, okay, so if we move this department here, I can figure out an opinion of cost. But what if they move there? Now I've got pieces and parts that we have to add together in order to, so if we can kind of get a direction of, yes, this is where we're going to put the departments, so I only have to price it one way, if that makes sense.
I think in light of the water department having made a decision, we probably need to loop back internally with Sarah again and talk about how that could get shaped out, because they are right now one of the main drivers of traffic in the building, the other one being the building department. So we'll have to, with them looking at a new location, we'll have to see how we would configure that internally.
Okay.
That will help from a standpoint of when we do play upset the fruit basket, they've moved out of the building, so then that clears up space to really start doing this flip-flop.
Sure. You have anything?
Is that a for sure thing that the water department's moving? Has that been finalized? Okay.
Todd is an engineer. He won't give you 100%.
Hey, Wes, I'm good at 95%, Todd.
Okay. Do you have anything else for us?
I don't think so, but if you do end up with a couple more questions, I'm just across the street, so let me know.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. The next item marked for discussion is on page 2, number 9. Is there anything prior to that anyone wants to discuss individually? Otherwise, we'll move on to the presentation regarding annual financial report. Okay. Thank you.
We don't have to read that.
We have,
So thank you, Your Honor and fellow council members. This is a presentation of the annual financial report that gets submitted to the state by December 1st. And I just want to stress that this is for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2019. So I know that there's a lot going on with budget and this year and then next year, but this is for fiscal year 18-19. So this is the summary page that you should have in front of you. There is some detail in the back further down, but I just wanted everybody to see that this is what they're referencing, the summary page that gets submitted along with the other pages to the state.
And just so you are aware, this is our accountant, Brian
Sorry, I
McKenzie.
should
He did not.
introduce myself. Yes, I'm the accountant. I'm Brian McKenzie, and I made one presentation to you before, and this is my second presentation. Thank you. So some key points to note that, like I said, this is the annual financial report that's submitted to the state by December 1st, following the fiscal year end. This is a high-level summary report. The difference between this report and many other reports that you may have seen is that this is, the revenues are by source and that the expenditures are by function, not so much focused at the department level. And the other thing to note is that the expenditures are monitored during the year for budget amendments if needed. So as we go through, just bear that in mind. So I just wanted to go over some of the key sources of revenue. Obviously, property taxes is the number one, or one of the main sources. So here are some of the other ones that are broken out in the annual financial report. Other city taxes, things like franchise tax, hotel, motel, local option sales tax. Intergovernmental, which is contributions at the federal, state, and the local level. Fees and services for water, sewer, garbage, stormwater, road access fees, inspections, cultural services, and then other financing, which encompass things like proceeds of long-term debt and capital asset sales. And on the expenditure side, again, note that this is by function at the state level. So these things are broken out by things like public safety, which encompasses multiple departments, police, fire, animal control, and public works, things like roads, sidewalks, snow removal. Culture and recreation, which again would encompass multiple departments, parks, recreation, library, our pool. And then the debt service, which encompasses principal payments and interest payments. A couple of others would be community and economic development and general government in there. So I just wanted to highlight some of the revenue sources that we exceeded or did not quite exceed or did not meet. So I know this is quite hard to see, but you should have the slides in front of you. So other city taxes, there's about $1 million that we did not receive, that we were under budget. Generally, that was due to the electric gas franchise fee that did not start until this fiscal year. And then use of money and property, that source we actually exceeded. This was due to interest revenue being higher than originally anticipated when the budget was formulated. And then another couple of revenue sources to note. The differences, intergovernmental, there were some park grant reimbursements that were not received in fiscal year 19 that were originally budgeted. And then other financing sources would be mostly our bond revenue, which for the most part, this was eco-industrial park related bonds that were scheduled to be received in fiscal year 19, which were not. And on the expenditure side, there were a couple of main areas where we did not meet our budget or did not spend. These again primarily were because of the Eco-Industrial Park and the CNG fleet replacement that was put into the budget, and these were expenditures that were not expended in fiscal year 19. So capital projects is obviously a high expenditure section. So I just wanted to highlight some of the projects that were completed here on the screen. I'm not going to read them all, but these are some of the projects that came to completion in fiscal year 19. So then moving on, the annual financial report also has a summary of our debt. So you can see here the majority of our debt is made up of general obligation debt, just over 55 million. Then we have our revenue debt, that's from the hotel, the new hotel, and then we have some GEO annual appropriated debt at 3.3 for a total of 62.7, just over 62.7 million. And then to put that into perspective with the statutory GEO debt limit, so for comparison, fiscal year 17-18, the 129.6 million is the 5% of our assessed valuation. That's our GEO state limit, and you can see that that's last fiscal year just hovered above 40%, and then this fiscal year just hovers below 40%. So those are also summarized on the annual financial report. And that's all I had. If you have any questions or here, or I can be reached by email, or if you had any questions and you wanted any deeper questions on this report.
Questions?
No.
Steve? No? Okay. I guess there are no questions, so thank you so much.
Okay.
Maybe a cell phone. Could we get your cell phone?
Zach would be happy to give you his cell phone.
Ooh, that was quick.
Yeah.
That was quick, Zach.
Yeah. Before you say anything else.
Came out too easy.
Okay, so you're moving on now to the report?
Yes, I am. And I'm going to make this a little more comprehensive. It's going to include the annual urban renewal report and the TIF certification, and then I'm also going to loop in one other. So just as a quick agenda here for you, I'm planning on covering just a quick refresher of what is tax increment finance. I'm going to go over the tax increment finance obligation instruments. I'm going to cover the 3 reporting requirements that we do have. I'll just jump right in.
Please proceed.
So here's a quick visual on kind of what is TIF. I put that land, if you look off to the right, I tried to make it easy to see. I like to envision a piece of property that has no construction on it. This is the simplest example I can come up with. And then we're going to build a building. So essentially we freeze the base, what is considered the base, at that level when it's land, and then the building brings assessed valuation. So the graphic on the left shows the blue as the base, the orange the increased assessed value, and then the green is the value going forward. So essentially, tax increment finance is that increase in assessed valuation and the increase in property tax that results from that growth. There are 3 obligation instruments in which we can utilize to use TIF. One is your standard rebate agreement, which is an agreement with the developer. We do a lot of those. The second is an internal loan. We use this one particularly for reimbursing the city for economic development payments made to Medco, to Cedar Rapids, and also just to help cover attorney costs associated with developing agreements. And then bonds and notes, which can be in the form of a GO that is abated by TIF through an urban renewal bond or even through a revenue bond, such as what we did for the hotel. The reporting requirements for tax increment finance include Gatsby 77, which is required for financial note disclosure, the urban renewal report, which reports on all TIF obligations, payments, and projects. It is by far the most comprehensive report that we have on tax increment finance. The TIF indebtedness certification, which is also due December 1st, in addition to the urban renewal report. And it essentially sends to the county a list of all of our debts and then what it is we're actually looking to receive in TIF revenue the next fiscal year. And then continuing disclosures. I thought it would be important to at least bring it up because bonding legislation has continued to formulate where we need to disclose more and more details on tax increment financing. So I'm going to briefly go over each one of these. Gatsby 77 requires a city to basically send a letter to every other taxing authority how much revenue was diverted. I caution a little bit the word diversion because it makes it sound like we're stealing or taking the revenue, which in a sense that we are, but when you consider the fact that Marion uses that but-for test, we prefer to look at it as the fact that this increment would not exist had we not done most of these projects. So rather than looking at it as diverted TIF revenue, I prefer to see it as deferred revenue that they will eventually see in their annual budgets. And you can see on the majority of it is actually ourselves, 38% of this last fiscal year, and obviously these change year over year based on what the levy rates end up being. But you can see the majority players there are Lynn County, Marion Independent School District, and Linn-Mar, and I included the full list. The one thing I will also like to mention is that the way this report is run, it only includes the expense. It doesn't look at the total revenue. It's really confusing in that nature. But you'll notice that the total was $3,319,727.92, and you can see my little note on the lower left corner. Amount includes $23,000 from Highway 13 North, number 1. So just trying to make sure you can follow that back to your financial reports. So the big question then is, this is where the revenue is coming from. Where are we spending that money? This is by district where the projects are at by percentage. The majority right now are in the Collins Road Urban Renewal District, then Central Corridor, then West Tower Terrace. And there were 21 rebate agreements. I've displayed all 4. The fourth one here, low to moderate income. There's an LMI requirement that kicks in when you TIF a residential area that makes you set aside dollars for low to moderate income projects to make sure that you are also servicing the area. So I just broke out that total there. Approximately $800,000 for rebate agreements, $272 for internal loans, $2.2 million in bonds or note payments, and $13,777 was spent this last year on the low to moderate, and that was in the form of the civil rights grant as well as a bus shelter that was installed. And then just to give you a little bit of detail on the rebate agreements, I did include in your little packet that I just handed you the full list. I listed the highest to lowest and included some of the higher ones here. The turquoise color is Collins Road Urban Renewal District. The navy blue color is the Central Corridor, and the green is West Tower Terrace. And then switching to the indebtedness certification, again, this is the form that we submit to the county that states this is what our TIF revenue or our TIF debts are, and here's the money we're looking to receive in the next year to pay our rebates, internal loans, and bonds and notes. And this is what we are requesting. As you can see, they're all up from last year. 1.15 million in rebate agreements, approximately 304,000 in internal loans, and 2.5 million in bonds and notes. And then again, to give detail on the rebates, I kept the color scheme going. So the turquoise is Collins Road, the navy blue is Central Corridor, and the green is West Tower Terrace. And I again did supply you the list. And then here's just kind of a summary by urban renewal area of the indebtedness certification. 72% Collins Road, 16% Central Corridor, 10% West Tower Terrace, and then 1% 29th Avenue and Highway 13 North. And then I was attempting to start to put together a forecast, and we need to do some more work there. So in lieu of doing an actual forecast, I thought I would list out some of the rebates that would be expiring in the coming years. ESCO Group, Hop Electric, Freund Vector, Lincoln View Square, Memorial Hall, and then I grouped a bunch of others because they're really small ones. These we will see expiring in the coming years out to 2025. This isn't a comprehensive list, but I did try to pull some of the larger ones.
So what's the number on there? What is that then? Is that the
It's
taxes?
representing kind of the last year of incentive that they will receive, and it's an approximated number. So ESCO Group, approximately 75,000 would be their, in 2022 would be their final payment, and it's approximately 75,000. Hop Electric, in 2022, we'd be making our last payment, and it would be approximately $30,000, and so forth.
Okay, so then 2022, the last payment is 30,000. What happens in 2023 with that number then? That
It gets released into the urban renewal area and goes back either if we decide to do another project, then we would be recapitalizing it. Otherwise, it would be additional revenue that everyone would receive back to their
I think that's
pool.
what people are probably wondering. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
And then on the flip side, since I was showing some expiring, I wanted to show some that are starting. I didn't take the time to try and come up with estimates because until their tax assessment hits, we don't really know. Squaw Creek Crossing, Timberline Manufacturing, Mojo Properties, Culver Enterprises, Tomaso's, GLD Properties, Synergy Equity Partners, KTRO, and then Seven Hills East. So these are all kind of projects you're seeing up and coming.
But these aren't the comprehensive lists. They're just some that you've
The
picked.
two lists that I gave you are the actual comprehensive lists of what was requested to the county. These right here aren't comprehensive. They're just some of the larger ones that I knew.
Okay.
And again, you can see that I kept the color scheme throughout. So the blue are in Central Corridor, the turquoise, Collins Road, and the green, West Tower Terrace. And with that, I'll open it up to questions.
This is good. I mean, this is the first time we've seen this type of a report and been wanting to see it for several years. And so this is a good start. And
Like I say, we
appreciate it.
actually, this report, the Urban Renewal Report and the TIF have actually been around for a number of years, but this is the first time we've presented.
where it's been presented in this way, I mean, this is easy for us to understand and consume it. So thank you.
And if there are no questions, that's,
Other questions for her?
No.
I just want to let you know, I am available if anyone wants to do a deeper dive in TIF. I know that there seems to be
I'll
a
probably
lot
have
of...
some more questions, so
Yep.
I appreciate that. Thank you to you and your department for the great work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah. Any other questions for Leanne? Thank you. Okay, the next item is under engineering, which is number 2. If there's anything prior to that that's unmarked, please feel free to say so at this time that you'd like to discuss. Otherwise, we'll move on to the marked items for engineering, 2 through 6. Mr. Barcalow?
Yes, Your Honor. For number 2, it's approving a contract amendment with HDR Engineering. So we approved a contract for $91,500. We're requesting an additional $5,000. There's basically 2 issues. One is task 400. This was the pre-model, so meaning before we actually figured out how much infiltration we have into our sanitary sewer, so we had to kind of guess. And so with that, we used the SUDAS, or the state standard, as our assumption. What it ended up turning out was the amount of infiltration we have into our sewer system is actually much less than the state standard, which is a good thing as far as the city is concerned, but it's a bad thing in that they had to then recalibrate the model to show those actual infiltration rates. The second thing that happened then is once we got the post meter flows, we found out that a lot of the issues were those downstream, the segment 7, 11 that we're working on. Luckily, they had already had that in a separate model, and they were able to merge the 2 models so they could run the hydraulic analysis on the entire model. If they were not the engineer that had done the model to the south, we wouldn't have that information, or we would have paid a lot more money in order to merge those 2 models. So that's why we're asking for the extra $5,000. We also had them run several additional intermediate models to see at what point are we having more of an issue or strain on our system versus just today and 20 years out. You know, when they gave the presentation, they showed several different iterations. So we feel the $5,000 is fair.
Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Any questions on that? Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Item number 3 is accepting the sanitary sewer slip lining project. So the original bid was $157,657.25. We did a change order that was approved by City Council for $41,302.15 because we got good bid numbers. We want to use as much of those annual funds as we can. So the new contract is just under $200,000, but our expenditures will be slightly under that. So the contract will be $98.8. So we came under their budget for that. So this is the slip lining project where we actually go through and put a liner inside the pipe and seal it.
So that's completed now for
Yep, we're ready to accept it.
Okay. Questions? All right.
Number 4, as part of the Hunter's Field addition, we're only accepting the paving on Winslow Road, and that's basically so that we can plow the snow on Winslow Road. The rest of the subdivision still has punch lists and items that need to be completed yet. They're not planning on building houses yet, so they don't need to have that accepted and plowed and garbage picked up on those streets. So we're only accepting the portion of Winslow Road that was widened as part of the project.
Questions? Okay.
Number 5, we're actually accepting the entire subdivision in this section, or at least the third portion of it. So this is north of Echo Hill, west of Alburnett. So it's basically in the red box there. It doesn't incorporate the lots exactly, but kind of shows you the area. It's just the next phase of that subdivision. And this way, they can start building houses, public service can plow the streets, and they can get their garbage picked up by accepting these improvements.
Okay. Questions on that? This just continues to expand out there.
It does.
Okay. Next.
Next one, so I made a error when I did the resolution, and since it's in the title, we have to modify that resolution. So originally it said 69,575 and 50 cents. The corrected amount is 69,757 and 50 cents. So we're just modifying the resolution. 80 cents, yeah.
When was that resolution?
It was last council meeting.
Last meeting, yeah. Can't believe I didn't catch that when I signed it. Okay. Questions? I think that's self-explanatory. All right. Community development, there's nothing marked under this part of the agenda. Actually, nothing marked in all of page 4. If there's anything that anyone would like to address, please say so at this time. And F1 on page 5 is also not marked. Everyone good on those? Okay, go up onto the regular agenda. We have one item marked under administrative services.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So this is a software agreement to, excuse me, to renew our services for our New World ERP software and then align that with our workforce management payroll, which is payroll automation and advanced scheduling, on a new contract that would be 36 months. It combines them, basically kind of moves it to the same data center. They all sync together. Didn't know if you had any questions about that other than basically that we're just extending contract and adding that automation, which I think we talked about in strategic planning and some other conversations too.
Yep.
Is there any cost difference besides adding the new module?
Somewhat, yes. We actually removed some modules we weren't using,
Okay.
and then added more modules we are using, like CAFRA reporting in place of GASB. Remember some of the other ones project planning, a few of those. We also are kind of realigning how we're paying for it as well. Previously, we had water department paying a little bit smaller portion, so they're paying a little bit more portion of what's more relevant to what they use now.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Public service. Mr. Miller?
Your Honor and Council, item number 1 under Public Service, this is approving the 2019-2020 Snow and Ice Control Program. So every year we come to Council with a program, and essentially what you're approving is a list of snow routes and a list of secondary roads, as well as classifications of each road that we maintain for winter operations. Just an overview for the Council. On average, each year we receive about 31.5 inches of snowfall, and will conduct between 20 and 30 snow removal operations. We usually see the first snow event in November 18th on average. Last snow event is usually in March. Top five highest snowfall seasons, as you can see, number 4 is highlighted. We like to use those years as kind of a gauge of our level of service. Back in 2007, 2008, we received 59.9 inches of snowfall. That was by far the busiest year we've had. I can remember because I did not get a day off until April. So that was a very busy year. So we use that as to set our level of service. It's a good indicator for us. And so in the program that you have in your packet, you have a classifications of streets. You have priority 1. Those are snow routes. We address those first. Anytime we get even an inch of snowfall or any type of winter precipitation, we will address those. And priority 2, those are considered secondary roadways. Those are the roadways, for example, in the central business district, or roadways around the schools, or roadways around other areas that are busy. And then priority 3, those are the residential streets. Typically, by policy, we don't go in there until there's 2 inches of snowfall. However, if we get an inch, we're in there, usually without any question. Our level of service we like to maintain is within 8 hours we can have a 4-inch snowfall cleared within the city of Marion. We had one event last year that we did not do that. We received an 8-inch to 9-inch snow event with 35-mile-per-hour winds. We had the entire city cleared within 10 hours. And that was a snow event we had on February 11th and 12th. It went for 2 days. It was, that was a tough event to get through. And so that was the only event we weren't able to clear the entire city within 8 hours. So, on average, as I said, we receive about 31.5 inches. Last year, we received 46.3 inches of snowfall. Obviously, that's up a little bit from previous years. And we gauge that again to the 2008-2009 operations at 59.9. One thing interesting is that we also track our hours. On average these days, we will put in about 3,100 hours of snow removal operations. Last year, we had over 5,000. And that just shows how much growth we have in the city. And so when we get those heavy winters, that they do take a toll on the staff. Back in 2008, 2009, we had about 2,900 hours for that, big year. So that's how much we've grown since 2008, 2009. And the events, these are our 16 operational events. We don't like to exceed those, but there are times when we ask our staff to move past, almost work a triple shift. Sometimes we have to. They don't go home for a while. We had 4 to 5 events in which we had to. This tells us we have to be careful about the residential growth within Marion. We have to make sure we're staffed. If not, we have to start rotating people different or look to other departments to provide support. And then winter de-icers last year, on average about 2,400 tons of de-icers or road salt. Last year we went over 3,000 tons, and just to put that in perspective, we used about 8,000 tons of sand. So streets are a little dirty this spring. So, the changes this year, we kind of already went through those. Those are basically with the changes with Lynn County and us. We're going to take over 35th Avenue. That's from 35th Street to Highway 13. That's going to be a secondary for us. And then Furnow Road, we're going to take, that's actually a residential area we're going to take over for the county. As that subdivision gets built over there, we'll program that as a snow route. And then up here, we're actually going a little bit farther north on 10th Street. We'll turn into Shamrock Woods, that cul-de-sac there, and we'll turn around and come back that way. So those are really the only changes we're proposing for this year. Other than that, any questions?
So if it's under 2 inches, the policy would be to not do anything, or?
We typically do. We get into situations that, let's say you get multiple 1-inch to 2-inch snow events, that will start piling up in the residential areas. So if we get 1.5 inches, we're going to go into residentials. It's been our policy for years and years and years. 2 inches, we go into residentials. But if there's snow on the ground, we're typically going to go in there. If we can plow it, we're going to go plow it. So
it's just good to have all this information because we do get the questions,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When are they going to plow my street? But
Yep.
so.
One of the things I think would help is educating the public. I'm talking to Amber about that and explaining to them how everything works. We address the snow routes first, and then within this time frame, we will address your residential street. I think that's really the big thing that we're getting such a huge residential growth. We're getting people from outside the area moving in that I think that would probably work to our advantage if we did that. So.
I think that's a good idea. Managing expectations is always key, and just so people know what to expect. Good. Questions for Ryan on that? Or was there anything else you wanted to add?
Nope, that's it. Just if you had any questions.
Ryan, I have a comment here.
Yep.
Just to run off the shirt tail of that as well too, we get a lot of calls. School routes. I know you and I have had that conversation before. Yep. Do those come in as an ancillary line, or are they primary, or if they're overlapping?
The school buses?
School buses, and it just seems like last year we got a lot of phone calls off the Tower Terrace area, Winslow Road area there. We a lot of accidents, parents upset because they felt that was a primary arterial and it needed priority. But I know you and I have had that conversation. I just want to make sure, again, it is critical so that we are getting those emails, those questions, that we can bounce and deflect that back so that we're transparent.
If you do give questions or any emails, we would like to take them.
Sure.
That way we can review them and make sure that everything is being followed through. Typically it is, but every once in a while, if we get a new driver or something, they take a wrong, that does happen. We want to make sure everybody understands the expectations.
Right,
So,
and I think kind of on the shirt tail with that as well as early outs. You know, we've had parents, I've talked to parents, you know, school let out early, 2 hours early, you know, dismissal, roads were questionable. I guess the way I answer that is if it was you know, an early dismissal because of inclement weather, conditions that, you know, the student drivers needed to, you know, be a little bit more prepared as well too.
it would also help to every once in a while sit down with both Linmar and Marion. They've had some staffing changes, Marion has, but for them to have this information helps them make decisions, because they do call us. Should we call off school? What should we do? Well, we don't want to make that call for you, but we can tell you what the roads look like, where we've been. It's really their call whether or not to call off school.
Sure.
So.
And then one last question for you is, do we send the trucks and crews out at the time of the accumulation? Do we wait until it's over? Do we wait till the wind dies? Do we wait until 7 o'clock in the morning? When do we officially start?
So we start as soon as snow starts sticking to the ground, and that's when we hit our snow routes and our secondaries, and we stay on those. And then when accumulation is, let's say we do get an inch, or if there is ice or something, we're going to stick around. That's when we start addressing everything. And so first and foremost is that we hit the snow routes. Those get the most attention because those are the primary routes in which first responders need to get to pretty much everywhere in the city. Sure. From that point on, we keep going. We keep addressing it to the best of our ability. Okay, so that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And that's because I've had that question and I've never known how to answer that. If we wait until the threat is over, or do we actively get out in front of it? And I think that's where I've always been a little confused as to.
With the snow routes and secondaries, we're on those right away. With the residentials, what we try to do is get to the back end of the storm, unless it's a significant snowfall event. If it's on the back end of the storm event, we'll go ahead and start in residentials. The one thing you want to be careful with is that you don't want to plow them twice, if you can help it, during a snow removal event. Now, sometimes we have to. If we're getting an 8-inch snowfall, we're going to have to go through there twice. If we can catch it on one pass, let's say in a 6-inch snow event, we will. So if that
that's perfect. Yep. Thank you.
Yep.
Yes, Steve.
I think your idea of working with Amber, in the next newsletter to provide the public with some education, some facts, some statistics, and your policies, I think is a good idea. Obviously, the snow removal was rated a little bit lower on the citizen survey, which I'm sure you're aware of, and hopefully that is one of the reasons you're talking about doing that. So I think how you react to that, the kind of information you give them, I think is important. Because again, I think a lot of the statistics, last year was kind of a little more challenging year. And again, everybody keeps asking me, well, gee, you're on city council, so you get, early, and I go, yeah, I'm clear at the end. So there's no advantage for being on city council for snow removal. But from the standpoint, I think educating the public in doing what you're doing, I think would be proactive and ahead of the season and letting them know what to expect.
Absolutely. We went back to staff and we talked about that because we were shocked.
Yeah, well.
And we started looking at the times we got done, and then I asked staff, hey, the citizens don't know this. We see this, and we see what we're doing, but they don't understand these operations. And so I think that's going to be critical moving forward. We see when we get done, we see when we initiate operations, and they work hard, but at the same time, I think painting the picture for the citizens to understand that, hey, this is what we have to work with, I think that would help.
Yep, I do too.
Other questions on that one? Okay, number two.
Number two, this is a proposed resolution for a contract change order with Rachi Construction. Essentially, we ran into a horrible fall. This is a site out there at the public service facility, and so we really don't have a choice. We had to move to core out some of these areas that you can see we had a lot of standing water, a lot of mud. We could not achieve compaction within these areas. These are our main drive areas around the facility. And so staff is recommending moving forward with this change order. Essentially what we're doing is we're going to core this out, put a stabilizer, geogrid down, and then bring up the grade with granular subbase or rock. There's really no way to get around this. It's just that's the soil That's what we had to deal with this season. So excessive rain, excessive moisture in the soil.
How far down are you going to have to go to stabilize that?
Foot.
Oh, a foot?
Yeah,
Okay, all right, that's not bad.
not too bad. We're still under budget with the project, under budget with this package. Yet we want to watch it, but it's something we are recommending moving forward with.
Right. Okay, questions? Number 3.
Then item number 3, this is a contract change order with Mid-States Concrete. These are our precast providers. What had happened is that they gave us a mock-up of a precast panel, and they brought it, and we looked at it, and our architect reviewed it. They're recommending this change order. Essentially what they're going to do is that this is for the entire facility. When they go to manufacture these panels, they're going to sandblast it and seal it. When we got the panels in from the mock-up and we looked at them, there were some concerns of long-term maintenance. Essentially, the panels were smooth, and we're worried about chipping as well as algae and mildew. And so they recommended that the best way to address that was to sandblast the entire panel and put a sealer over it. If the panels were to chip in the future, you would see it. And so we're looking for kind of a solution to a long-term maintenance concern here. So staff is recommending moving forward with that. Still under budget with the project, at least with this bid package. So
Go ahead.
Is there any type of warranty or sunset on the length of how long that sealer will last on that product?
Not necessarily last. It's just a one-time application. When they sandblast it, they seal it. It's supposed to be like a concrete sealer. You put it on when you pour the pavement, and then it's supposed to help protect it. In terms of warranty, I do not know that. I could find out. I could let you know.
That's not an important issue. I just wanted to make sure it was worth it. I know what sealing concrete is like, but it also has a longevity to it too. I know it wears off after a while, so I just didn't know if it was a 10-year, 15-year.
Yep. Our main concern was the chipping of the panel.
Right.
Which, if you saw the panel, it was very smooth, and then they took a little chisel and chipped it, and you could see it. And we're like, well, we don't want that. So by sandblasting it, you're not going to be able to see that chip. And then with that, the algae and the mold concerns that we will have, they've recommended that by sandblasting, it's going to be much easier to clean. So
it would obviously help for cleaning in the future as well too. So all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Under public safety, we have an unmarked item for discussion. Anyone want to discuss that one in particular? Okay.
Where does this land, this vehicle? What department?
Police.
Yours, sir.
Yeah. It's
You're
a
already
crime scene
getting
van.
vehicles. Okay, thank you.
Replacing a 2001.
Okay.
Okay. And that's coming from equipment replacement or from equipment?
Yes.
Okay. All right, under parks, Mr. Mike.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
First item that I've got on the agenda this afternoon is a project that we've actually been working on with staff and the park board from start almost a year now. Thought we were at a point where we could bring it before the city council. Basically what we have is a joint project with the Linn-Mar School District to put a track and regulation football field on the Lau Park property. Just some history. We went into an agreement with the school district back in 2002 when Oak Ridge School was under development, and we were also starting to develop the west end of Lau Park for our ball fields, those type of things. Decided there was an opportunity there to work with the school district on a grading plan and to develop the ball fields. At that time, we actually graded out the area where the Pee Wee ball fields exist today, and then over this area here where the track would land was actually graded out at that time to accommodate that full regulation football field and track. So at this point, the school district is actually ready to start development of that track project. So they hired Hall & Hall to come in and do some design work for it and kind of do the layout and see how it fit within the area. And it does actually fit, for the most part, pretty well on the site. The one thing that we would have to do is that service road that comes up and services the maintenance building over here, that will need to be moved a little bit. And as part of the project, we'd hard surface this area. And one thing that we're discussing with the school district right now is actually how we're going to make the connection over to the school where it comes out right now down by the school. This is their upper parking lot that they developed a few years ago, and maybe a connection that goes across here to service that parking lot. We're still working on some of those things. We actually, we actually have a meeting with the school district and Hall & Hall at the end of this week to work out some of the details. Perimeter around would be fenced. We had some discussions about that. Fence would be a low fence, only 4 foot high. We're requesting that it would be a coated fence, so it just wouldn't be your standard fencing. From an aesthetic standpoint, we want something a little bit nicer in the park. And then we're also talking about some natural landscaping around the track area too, just to help with aesthetics with the fence, those type of things. When the track would not be in use by the school district, it would be like we do with a lot of those joint projects, would be open to the public for public use or for our rec programming, those type of things. Kind of similar to what we do through the 2080 agreement now with the ball field areas, that during the school day, the school district has first use, and then we utilize those areas when not in use during the school hours.
What's the reason for the fence?
It's
Just
more
curious.
for security with that type of capital investment in a project like that. And we have had some issues out at the park with people driving into the spaces and from a standpoint of just trying to protect it, mostly for just damage due to vandalism.
But otherwise, it's going to be accessible. I mean, it's not. It's going to be gated.
It will have a gate, and that's one of the things that we're working through in the design part right now. How do we accommodate for that public use, still keep it halfway secure? It would not be locked, but we also need to figure out how that flow works so people feel that it's an area that they can go into and feel comfortable doing that. So we're still working through some of those details to finalize those. But I do understand the school district's concern. Last year we had 2 vehicles that came up across the pond dike and actually in the fall buried both vehicles out on that football field, and we did have an impact to our flag football programs. It was almost 2 weeks before we could actually get a wrecker in there to have them pulled out. So we do have those things that do happen, and as the park has become more attractive, more people are finding it, and those things will happen. So that's why the fence.
Okay, that's a good reason.
So basically, we just have on the agenda, just want to make sure that, that we have council support moving forward for the project, and just want to know if there were any items that at this time that I could field for, outside of what we've already talked about.
The city's portion of the cost?
Actually, good point. 100% of the cost will be the burden of Linn-Mar School District. We're just providing the property.
The land, the space.
Yep.
Okay, good.
What about maintaining it?
Maintenance will also be, within the fenced area will be the school district's responsibility.
They'll do it within the fence, then we do,
Outside fence perimeter, we'll still take care of that. Inside, they will take care of maintenance inside that
And the
that area.
landscaping that you talked about, that would be theirs or ours?
We will maintain the landscaping. We're still working through whether we'll incorporate the landscaping component of it within the project or if it's something that we'll come back to and do as a project after this construction is over. Right now, it's slated, if everything goes, we get the plan, design, everything done, construction spring, summer of '20.
Great. Any other questions?
I do, and I'm sorry to split hairs here. The mowing, who mows the inside? Will they,
Interior will be done by the school
so
district.
they will physically come out and mow just the inside of the field?
With
Okay.
their baseball, softball complex right next, and they're out there mowing just like we are
Okay,
all the
perfect.
time too, and they'll just come in and manage that and take care of that area is what we've talked about in the agreement. Well, with this project coming forward, another thing that we'll be working on too is updating the 2080 agreement, and we'll call all these things out as we go through that.
I think it's a great benefit to the public when we can join forces like that and have collaboration on projects and not duplicate facilities and so.
That's a great, yeah, those are always great, because I know the public loves hard, the surfaces for that, for walking and recreation, so.
Yeah, I think
We don't have too many tracks around here, so
Yeah, and
it's available.
I see the Marion School track down at the bus garage being used all the time by the public, and this provides just another opportunity on the north side of town too. So I think, like everyone said, it's just a win-win and great partnership with another school district and another project.
I see the one down on Indian Creek for Linmar, the old football field that's used all the time, so.
And it will not be lighted, by the way. That's one thing that a lot of the district stuff is lighted. At this track area and football field will not be lighted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Next.
I'd like to remove item number 2 from the agenda, and we'll circle back with that item probably. Will probably be the second meeting in December. As I was prepping for the meeting today, I was looking at from information in the file on the property that we were going to talk about. I found a memo to the City Council, would have been back in about 2010, that was from the previous Parks Director to City Council, that the developers had made a request to consider naming the park. I believe it was Prairie Hill Park that they had called out. That had never gone before the park board, and I just found it today. So would just like to pull that item from the agenda. We'll circle back, we'll run it back through park board, have that discussion with them, and then come back with recommendation to the City Council. Probably, like I said, that second meeting in December.
Okay.
Third item on the agenda is basically approving the certificate of substantial completion for the Lau Park maintenance facility addition. We're wrapping that project up. We've got a few minor punch list items still to address with the contractor, but they're just very minor interior items and just nothing that would stop us from wanting to have the council move forward and improve that substantial completion certificate at this time. Right now, the project is under budget. This contract with it is under budget. We'll have some, with the way the fall has gone, we'll have some site work to finish up in the spring, but that's being done by the department. And hopefully, we'll be able to start moving equipment into the building the end of the month here, so.
Is there a plan, and maybe this is a use for the unused funds, is there a plan to have some landscaping and screening and
Yes.
tree plantings around it?
Actually, there is, and that's one of those
To
things.
kind of
when I-
soften that a little bit in the park?
When I talk about, we've got some items to finish up in the spring, and here's another kind of view of it. This is the new roadway that comes in and then basically stops when you get west of the building. We intentionally built this berm up along this side, so visibility from ball diamonds as you come up the roadway, you're setting at a lower elevation. Our plan is that along this entire berm, that we'll actually plant that with pine trees, and that'll help shield the building on that side for an aesthetic, for improved aesthetic value. And then also on this side out here, we plan on re-landscaping all this. That'll have trees, some shrubbery, park sign will go in there, and then we'll also apply that. Now we've actually started doing some shielding on the south side. About a year ago, on the other side of the pond, we planted about 100 trees that eventually will grow up, and from the neighborhood to the south, you'll never see the building once those trees start to mature. And the other thing is around closer to the building is to do some more improved landscaping there too. So to answer your question, yes, we do have something in the works.
No, I figured that you have a plan. I just wanted to bring that out, I think, because people, I'm sure, are wondering, and when they go to the park and see it, they're going to wonder. So it's just good to have that information out, that there is a plan for that.
Originally, as we started to build that, I was a little bit concerned with look and everything and size when you go up and those type of things. But now that it's completed out there and how it kind of meshes with the existing building, it actually doesn't look, nearly or stand out nearly as much as I thought maybe it would. It did kind of meld in there, and I think that for most people that it'll be okay.
Okay. It's just good to be able to tell people there is a plan to screen it. So, anyone else with questions?
I got just a comment I guess I'd like to add. I would just like to extend, not to Mike, but to all of our departments. I've had some conversations with some of our new construction projects, and sometimes there's been workmanship that's been done that's been questioned by our directors and our leads that are on those projects. And I just want to share the appreciation to you folks for holding our contractors and our builders and all of them to higher standards, to making sure that stuff, sometimes there's stuff that's put down that's questionable. You and I had conversation about some concrete, and it was asked to be removed and redone again because it wasn't delivered as promised. So I just want to extend that thank you. I know I've talked to several different people with different projects, and we appreciate that. We're carrying that through to make sure we're getting a 100% completed product in the best condition that we can get it. So thank you, Mike. I appreciate what you're doing, and everyone else.
Yep. Thank you for your comments.
All right. Anything else from Mike? That's it. Thank you. On to engineering.
So items 1, 2, and 3 are all related. So basically, we got a request from Public Service to add no parking on Orchard Road. So it affects these 3 property owners. We're recommending to add no parking to the south side. As you can see, this is a dead-end street. If this street was built today, it would have a cul-de-sac or a hammerhead at the end for them to turn around for both garbage pickup, post office, so anybody can use that. It wasn't until we reconstructed Fairview Drive to the north that this loop wasn't here. So before, this was a dead-end street and was even worse of an issue. At least having another access point in there helps there with public safety. So we did notice the property owners on the north side and these that it directly affects, and then one property owner here that we are recommending the no parking regulation just on the east side of Orchard Road. So this did go to TAC, so you already have a TAC report in there. So it's all 3 items, one after another. So the first one is receiving and filing the request from the Public Service Department The second is the TAC report, and the third is resolution approving the no parking.
And have we heard from the homeowners, or?
I have not had, we sent a letter out to them, but I haven't heard anything back. I told them Thursday was the time to come and speak to
So
council.
we may hear from someone on
We
Thursday.
could, but I have not yet,
Okay,
When was the letter sent out?
last week.
Last week?
okay. Questions on that? Is that self-explanatory? Okay, number 4?
So number 4, these individuals came and presented to city council during the council comment period at the end. They did get their petition together, and so at this point, we're just receiving and filing that petition. We'll send it to TAC for recommendation.
Okay. Everyone okay with that one? All right.
And then just to give council an update, we will be having a 5th item that's added on Thursday. That'll be a new item that's starred. That'll be regarding the fire station. So I will send you an email on that.
Okay. Community development, Mr. Treharn.
The first item that's identified is the acquisition or the purchase of a bus shelter. The project to be located on Twisttown Road. I don't know how familiar the council is. I don't know if we've talked too much about it, but the transfer station that was of bus service and bus lines was occurring at the mall, and then the mall decided they really didn't like that, and they placed them in the old U.S. Bank building on the over by Home Depot. Well, ultimately they got upset about that situation, so now they're actually transferring in the right-of-way on Twixtown Road by Long Branch. So, there's very limited facilities or anything there. Cedar Rapids did place 2 shelters in a pad on the south side, kind of back behind Bed Bath & Beyond. So what's going on is the buses are they're dropping off, and then they go around the block, but out there the block is all the way, I believe they go all the way down to Blair's Ferry, come back around, and it takes time to restructure the pickup and the transfer of that process. Our economic development group received some questions about providing service to Legacy Manufacturing out in the business park. But one of the situations that exists is they couldn't find time in the routes. So in speaking with Cedar Rapids Transit, they felt like they would be able to accomplish that extension of the route out to Legacy if they could get a shelter and a stop on the north side of Twixtown Road, and they wouldn't have to go around the block, and how they can reconfigure their routing. So at this point, we felt like that was a good trade-off. We have some dollars available and associated with LMI TIF dollars. They are budgeted. There's $200,000 budgeted in that. This is about $7,000 worth of expenditure, and would provide us to expand services out in the business park. So Ryan and his crew have been fantastic and put down the pad for the shelter, and so we would like to go ahead and purchase the shelter and get that up and provide that opportunity out on Twixtown Road. So, any questions on that?
Is this a location that would have been covered by our upcoming project that's through the MPO with the shelters? I mean, is this a location that would have been included in that anyway?
It's on the federal aid.
It could be, but I don't think we want to wait that long.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying we should. I'm just curious.
Yeah. I don't believe it's on the federal aid route, but I'd have to look.
Okay.
Most of that is on arterials streets. So.
Okay. Questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier. So on our future planning for additional bus shelters, I know you got the MPO dollars. Is that committed, or is that still to be applied for? So, I mean, is that a 2020 project or not?
Yeah, the MPO dollars, I don't think they become available till like 23. And that is an 80-20 split, yeah. So we haven't even gone out for RFPs for that yet. So I would not recommend waiting until you had that money available.
Oh, yeah, no, not for this. I'm talking about for all the other ones we're.
Yeah, well,
planning.
there's plenty of money there that we can't build all the bus shelters with the money that we have.
Okay. All right.
So, what's the rest of the $200,000 slated
So
for?
within the budget, we're developing a program around the low and moderate income dollars for TIF revenue. I think Amal's been kind of leading that charge, and we haven't really rolled it out at this point, but internally we're putting together how that money can be used. Some of the money we've talked about being used for the Marion Independent School District and some housing assistance, which we're working on right now. So
We did also use part of it to make a contribution to the Lynn County Housing Trust Fund as match for some federal dollars that they were able to leverage.
Okay, that's where that came from. Okay. No questions? Next.
This is approval of acquisition plat related to 597 21st Street. So this is a property that we just acquired through condemnation a couple weeks ago. The property that we're looking at, not showing up. I don't know if you can see that, but this is the property that we're talking about. So we're just acquiring the north half of that area of that lot. So this splits it out, and then we'll acquire that. There's a building on it. We also received this property in association with that condemnation hearing. And so we're going to be working through relocation and reestablishment costs associated with, there's a tenant in the home here that we'll be working with, and then obviously the owner has a business in that one, and we'll work with him as well. We'll be working with Universal Field Services on that, and I know you're seeing a lot of work associated with Universal as it relates to a lot, whether it's a trail project or the Central Corridor project, and so you'll see an additional, some billing coming through from there, probably bigger than what we've been seeing recently.
But our decision on Thursday is to approve the acquisition plat, which is just the plat splitting out the portion we're buying, creating a legal description that can be transferred to us.
And I apologize, the notes on the left were transferred from an additional slide. So,
question?
No, I was just impressed with the comment. That was just like, right on the money.
This is what I do. All right.
And
next.
And then the last item is we're moving forward with the acquisition of an inspection vehicle that was budget amount $26,000. We're at about $22,700 right now, which is under budget. And we did go out and compare with Toyota, Honda, and the Ford. The Ford came out the winner, and the old vehicle is going to go to the library.
Don't we have a 2001 cargo van you can borrow?
We talked about that. I was just gonna brush on the side of it with a big old wide brush. Inspections.
That's what I'm talking about. I love it. I love the
What about number 4, Tom? Did you address that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I got ahead of myself. So within our zoning code, there's a requirement that when you rezone property, that you post a sign in the front yard of that property for rezoning. We thought that might be a little cost prohibitive to do that when we rezone the entire city. So we're looking for some direction to provide a additional sentence within our code that would provide, at the time of we do a citywide rezoning, there would be different parameters. And we haven't developed those. We're kind of looking at other communities to figure out how they've done it, but certainly don't want to get ourselves in a situation where we're doing something that conflicts with the ordinance, specifically if it requires us to put a sign in everyone's front yard. So we're not going to circumvent any public notices. One of the things we're trying to do right now is to provide notice through the messenger. So once we kind of figure all this out and we get some time, we can say, February 14th or whatever day in February, we're going to hold that public hearing. We'll work with Amber to get it in the newsletter. So it'll go to every household, and there'll be an article and a notice of the public hearing at that time. So that's kind of how we're planning to roll that out. So everybody in the city should get notified of that through the messenger, and then we'll also be soliciting, local media sources at that time too.
So
this will come after the first of the year, but we just need to get that ordinance amended at this time. So we're just looking for some direction.
Okay, but the motion is directing staff to amend chapter 176.4. That's not accurate, right? I mean, it's directing staff to come back with a proposal for amendment, or, I mean, we're not voting to actually amend.
No, motion directing staff to amend, or I see what you mean.
To propose an amendment.
Work on the word, yeah.
Yeah, we can
Okay,
reword that a little bit.
Okay. I was just trying to be clear.
Recommendations.
Yeah.
All right, questions on that? Are you looking for any direction tonight or on Thursday? Or
No, we'll just put the motion on the agenda.
Okay, all right.
We're trying to make sure that everybody's aware that we're doing this, so it's not a big question. Because this is whenever somebody rezones, the signs are a big part of that. So
Sure. Okay, any questions, or is that clear?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next, we have library.
Good evening. Am I on here? Thank you. I think so. Yes, maybe. One moment, please. Yay. Sorry about that. Thank you, Rachel. So I wanted to have a chance before Lon and Leanne or whoever's going to speak to just remind everyone how we got to this point in discussing our plan for the library moving forward. Just a reminder, this is the same data that I showed back, it's been a while now, on September 11th when we had our joint meeting between the library board. Did I say July 11th? It was July, I think I said September. Okay, so July 11th, where we had our joint meeting with the City Council and the Library Board, and we consensused around this budget and made sure that you all knew that we were moving forward with the assumption that this is the budget that we would have. And so just to clear the budget again, we're looking at a $14,455,000 building. We have some site prep in there for about $790,000. That's an estimate based on what the architect thinks that we might have to do. Obviously, I think that's a little high based on some of the things that we've been discussing. Our internal FF&E is between furnishings and technology there, about $1,350,000. We have our implementation and then the fees and expenses that go along with that, with our architect and all those other pieces. So that brings our project total to $18 million for the project overall. Not included in what you're seeing here is a $3 million private ask that will be doing a capital campaign for private funding for this project as well. So ultimately, we are looking at the city to cover the $15 million, although we know we already have some money of the lost funds and some TIF and different things that I think Lon will be talking about as he talks about the finances. Just to give you an update on where we are, I've been talking about, we've been working on the project a little bit up until this point. We are in what we consider the pre-construction phase. So we've been working on the schematic design. So no major decisions are being made about the project right now necessarily. We're just testing our budget, making sure that the things that we want to have in this new library can fit in the square footage that we are talking about, which is 50,000 square feet, and also that we get all of the things that we believe are important, not only from a library perspective, but a community perspective. So just a reminder, we have our steering committee that has been participating in this process. We, last week, invited in our chamber and Medco partners to provide feedback on the work that we've been doing. Again, just to get everybody an idea of where we're going at this point. Our goal based on this schedule is to get through our schematic design so that we can turn this work over to our construction manager the first part of December, and that's when we'll really test the budget to understand when we have to start cutting. We keep calling that the dream crushing phase of the process, right? Making sure that we know how far our $18 million budget is actually going to get us. And really starting somewhere around the middle of January is where we really start that design phase, where we'll be bringing things back to council and having you provide feedback and looking at the design. We're just not that far in the process yet. What I do know is, just to give you a high level of where we are with the project and remind everyone, this is the aerial view of our current library with the lot to the east where we're going to be building the library. And we have made a decision of where the building is going to land, or how it's going to be positioned on that lot. So you can see that the library will be positioned up flush with the 6th Avenue corridor there, with the entrance there on the corner. So you can see that with our parking in the back. One of the things that we will be talking to council about moving forward as we continue to plan is, what are our future plans with 11th Street? Where right now the architect is really trying to contemplate our position in Uptown and how we can stay connected to other things that are happening in Uptown, and we understand that there's some opportunity to connect to the plaza, future plaza project, and things that are happening elsewhere that are outside of our control, but things that we know that other organizations and departments of the city are working on. I will tell you some things that we are considering that play into the ability for us to benefit from 11th Street being at least partially closed. And so I'll show you that here on the next slides. Any questions about this area here where the library is positioned? This is a 2-story building, equal amount of square footage on the first floor as the second floor. So the work, as I said, that we've been doing up until this point is really just making sure that we get what we want to fit in the space. So this is a very preliminary floor plan of what the first floor of the library will look like. Some key decisions that we've talked about as we've gone through is that we will have our children's department on the first floor. So this big area that you're seeing here will be children's. This is a very active learning area for our kiddos. There's going to be lots of activity, and we expect this to be an area that parents will come and spend a day. There'll be enough activities in this children's area that it will be very much a place for parents to come and we say camp out, so to say. What's really exciting over here is this big meeting area, multi-purpose room space that we have here on the 11th Street side. Some of the things, just to kind of get you guys excited, that we're dreaming about is, if this portion of 11th Street is at some point repurposed or closed, we're really looking at ways that we can bring the outside in and have exterior doors. Imagine something like big glass doors that can roll back, or some roll-up doors where we can open the library out onto the plaza. And so we could have a very outside-in kind of feel here. We're looking at this multi-purpose space of having that type of feel all the way around. So even inside the library here, that these walls can be very flexible. If we want to have an exhibit, I keep talking about things like the Dinosaur Zoo coming to town, us being able to bring in some museum quality exhibits to the library here in Marion, to bring that type of atmosphere to Uptown. So lots of flexibility in this space. The second floor here is, we have adults, the main adult collection here. I should back up and say that this area that you're seeing here in the first floor is also a very large adult collection. It's what we're calling our marketplace. The marketplace includes things like Holds pickups, newspapers, new materials, large print, a lot of those quick access things that some of our older population are looking to gain access to quickly when they come into the library. I want to kind of focus on both of these floors as being intergenerational. One of the things that we're really focusing on for this library is that we're bringing our generations together. Instead of trying to separate everybody out, we are separating them out, but we're also trying to create these natural locations within the library that the generations come together in natural ways. So that's what you see here on the second floor with the majority of our adult collection with a rooftop terrace. It's not really rooftop, it's a patio that comes off the second floor and looks over the park. Really creates a nice area that weddings could happen out there. There could be social events, those types of things out in this area. And in the middle section here is where we're calling our creator space, another intergenerational space where we're going to have things like a recording studio, a green screen type of video, AV equipment. This is where you'll find areas that we can have our quilters come in and do their quilts and their artwork and work with both the adult population and our teen population. Really, anybody who wants to come up and work within this creative space will be able to do that. So as we continue down this path, we're going to continue to envision what this space will look like and how we'll utilize this. And then we have this nice corner over here where we'll house our teen population and all of the things that we're going to be doing over there. Some of the main components that are not as obvious on this page is that we have a lot more meeting spaces, a lot more opportunity for study rooms that are age appropriate. So we have study rooms in our children's area, study rooms in the teen area, study rooms and small meeting areas in our adult area. We also have some 8-person meeting rooms as well as conference room. Here, you all may know that we currently share our meeting room space with the public now, so I'm very sensitive that the staff don't use our meeting spaces more than our public does. So we have been able to, really dedicate community and public space here while also maintaining some of that space for staff to have access to, so we're not competing. And we're really making this a space focused on our public and giving them the maximum amount of space that we think they deserve. So I wanted to give you a little bit of an update and just kind of a reminder of where we started, with this project, how we got to this point and where we are now. Once we decide and we go over the financing plan today, we will be back in December, and at that time we will start hopefully the financing process, as well as we will have some major contracts to be approved so that we can continue on with our process. One of the big driving factors for us right now is cost. As you all know, and you've heard with some of these other projects, the faster that we can go, the more cost effective it's going to be for us. And so we're trying to keep the project moving so that we can control cost instead of those costs going up the longer the time period is between where we are now and the construction time. Any questions for me? Am I turning it over to Lon? Okay.
Are you considering a public art component?
Yes. We are planning to incorporate public art everywhere inside the building, and we're also
on the outside.
And we are also talking about public art on the outside. One of the things that we're looking at right now is a way that we might be able to incorporate public art into an urban playground, so that there might be some type of playground equipment or multi-use art outside the library that can be interactive for our public as they come up. So way away from that right now, but definitely on our must-have list.
Questions for Holly? Okay.
I'm sure I'll be back after we go through this next section.
Catch up here for a second. I'm still not quite sure how come Holly gets to talk about all the fun stuff, the building layout and all the fun things that you're going to do inside, and I'm the one who gets to talk about the money and how we have to pay for all of it. But we wanted to loop back to the council with how the financing for the project would work, because obviously when we moved away from being able to look at this as a lease purchase project, that was a big sea change in how the financing pieces for the project would have to come together. So there's a couple of things in there that we need to come to talk about, which is the breakdown of financing, the assumptions that we're making, what the cash flow looks like, and how those components really all come together for the library project. So there are 4 different pieces that are anticipated to be part of the overall project right now. The single biggest one is local option sales tax, and I'll give Leanna a lot of credit for working on that to see what options we have to be able to capitalize that so that we can bring the local option sales tax forward to use it all as cash and apply that towards the project. In the spending plan, it was allocated at $500,000 a year over the full 10 years of local option sales tax, but obviously that extends out through 2024, so the closer we get to that, the more cash we have accumulated, but there's still going to be some that we have to cover. So she's been combing through our expected expenses for the broader local option sales tax to see if there's a way that we can make sure that we can just bring that all forward and apply it as cash towards this project. There's the private funding component that Holly has already addressed with their target of $3 million. We have the potential sale of the current site, which we have programmed in at $3 million, and then the whole goal with all of this has been to bond for as little of the project as we have to, because that, of course, has a long-term impact on property taxes. So the total city contribution for the overall project comes up to $15 million out of the $18 million budget. So we're making a couple of assumptions here with how this will work out. The first one being that the city doesn't have a lot of mechanisms for being able to do things like finance the pledges on the library. We certainly can do that. The city could take an assignment of the pledges as collateral, and we could add that to our borrowing. But when we're thinking about how this works and just public perception on the building, that would mean that instead of announcing to the world that we intend to borrow $7 million, now all of a sudden you're announcing that you're intending to borrow $10 million, even if you intend for pledges to pay that $3 million off. The same thing applies to the sale of the existing facility. So, timing-wise, how do we time the sale of the current facility so that we know we'll have that money to be able to apply towards the overall cost of the project? So we've tried to base everything out around the construction schedule that Holly just showed you that was prepared by Enberg Anderson and their projections of when we would actually need the cash to apply towards contractor payments for the project.
So what does the Library Foundation actually have as collateral to finance the pledges? I'm assuming that'll be like a pledge loan. You go through a bank, you get the cash up front to fund the construction. And so what's a bank going to use for collateral on that besides a pledge for something from the city?
They do have some pretty significant assets. I think the question is going to be how much of that will they pledge towards the existing capital campaign, and how much would they need to keep in reserve to maintain as collateral for the project in addition to the pledges. Because normally with your pledges you're going to have a certain percentage that you're going to expect to write off over the course of it. But some of it comes down to the security of who's providing those. For example, if it's the Hall Perrine Foundation or the state CAT grant, those are very secure and are going to weigh heavily into the bank's consideration. Holly may have some more detail on the foundation, but that's what we're looking at.
I would just agree that they do have collateral in money and endowments. Just as we talk about the Library Foundation right now, that organization is combined with the fundraising committee and our Friends organization. So combined, their collateral together would be what would be securing that.
Okay, very good.
So then, moving on from that, this is just a high-level overview of what the cash flow model looks like, assuming that we'll be able to bring forward the dollars from the local option sales tax. We are looking at splitting the bond over a couple of calendar years, even though it could potentially hit in the same fiscal year. That has some implications for us as far as splitting out when the debt service payments would hit, which is a good strategy for us to be able to moderate the impact that it would have on debt service levy, because that would split it over a couple of consecutive fiscal years. And as I said, we've tried to tie that towards when we would anticipate actually having the expenses associated with the project. So with that GO bond, as I said, we're looking at having that split at $7 million over 2 calendar years. Now, this does presuppose that we would use the reverse referendum process. I know we've had several conversations with the City Council about that. With GO debt for construction of a building like this, it's going to be considered a general corporate purpose. We're in an urban renewal area, the Central Corridor Urban Renewal Area, which does give the council the opportunity to do it as a reverse referendum versus direct referendum. And that's how we presupposed this, because that's what the calendar and build schedule was really built around, was moving through reverse referendum. With that, the City Council publishes notice to the public that we intend to borrow for the project. We would put out the notice for the amount that we intend to borrow for the project. That kicks in the timeline for a petition to be filed that would require that the project be put out to referendum for a direct vote for the public. The language that has to go in that is very prescribed. The state code sets out the way that the language has to be put together. But obviously, I think we're at the point that if we go through with reverse referendum, if we are going to have to do a vote, we need to know that sooner rather than later. The other alternative would be council could just say, we do want to go ahead and put it out for a vote, but that has implications for the construction schedule, and as we've seen on a lot of projects, with these, time really is money as far as what you can afford to build and what happens with construction inflation. So that reverse referendum is allowable in urban renewal areas. And one of the things that you can do is we can hold the public hearing, give ourselves the statutory authorization, but there is not a requirement that we have to issue the bonds with any certain time frame after the statutory authorization is achieved. We did that, for example, with the Public Services Project by giving ourselves the authority to issue revenue debt related to that project, but we have yet to actually issue any debt related to it. And you can do one set of hearings for the total amount that you would do, even if you are anticipating that it would be done over multiple issuances. So moving from that into the building sale, we do not have the budget to look at doing a temporary location, so we don't have the option of putting the building out for a request for proposals or a request for qualifications right now to be able to sell it and move the library in advance of moving into the new facility. So what we would like to do, ideally, you'd work this out, we'd get to the point where we would bid the new project, we'd have our firm construction schedule, we would know what the hard numbers are. As soon as that is there, as those are known, and that we have our firm construction schedule, we know when our anticipated move date would be, we would do an RFP or an RFQ for the existing building, and we'd know what the anticipated proceeds would be. We would tie the sale of the building, shoot for about 30 days of the move date for us to move into the new one, so that we'd have the proceeds from the sale to apply to our last series of payments for construction and to the retainage for the project. So we would not have to do any type of a short-term borrow or something like that to cover that, because the cash would come in before it was actually needed to help us close out the construction of the project. It's going to require some coordination. The other advantage that has is if, for example, we put it out, we've got it plugged in at $3 million. If we don't get that, if we get 2.6, we need to have the flexibility to be able to make any adjustments. The sooner that that number is known, the better for the overall project being able to proceed. And then with the capital campaign pledges, we've covered that already. Ideally, we would like to have the Foundation and Friends be able to cover those. The less ideal situation, although it is legal and could be authorized, is that the city would have to capitalize those on a separate note from our repayment of the bonds on the project. I'm anticipating that we would do 20-year issuances for the bonds on the project, but with a pledge loan, normally your repayment schedule is much shorter than that. A lot of your ones that might come in from other foundations or grant sources are one time, but if you have some substantial ones, we could see 3-5-year pledges for any larger private donations. So that's how we would anticipate the construction budget to come together and get the project accomplished. So the decision really before the council is what process do you want to move forward with. Dorsey and Whitney, it doesn't take them long to put the documentation together to get the public hearing process started. So if you're amenable to it, we could actually be moving forward with that piece in December. That is the piece that really keeps the project closest to the original schedule, because then once we have the statutory authorization and the reverse referendum period is cleared, we could move forward and really start work in earnest on a lot of those contracts.
Yes, sir.
What is the difference in the timing, Lon, if that is not a reverse referendum and is a direct referendum? So what is the difference in the timing on how that might play out?
If you elect to go with direct referendum, you have to take a look at when the allowable dates for election are, and the council would have to make a decision on which one of those you want to shoot for. I don't profess to be an expert on those. I think the earliest one available would probably be May, and then I believe there's another one that's available in August for special election. That's a separate schedule from the elected representatives one now that have all been moved together in November. And obviously, that has implications for the project. At this point, we haven't put anything together for doing any type of public information campaign in advance of doing the vote. The bond election itself would be somewhere between probably 21 and 24,000.
So,
Just one piece of information I want to add. So I just want to say thank you to Lon. This is a lot for me to figure out. So I appreciate the partnership and putting this presentation together tonight. I will tell you, just to add, one of the key factors for me, number one, is to keep the construction schedule going so that we don't get behind. The other key factor for me is that we can't start our private campaign until we have the public funding secured and understand where we're going from a public funding perspective. So all of these things are tied together for us, as we talked about back in that July meeting. And so we are at a point now where it's a go or no go again, and we'd like to keep the project going. In order to do that, even to come back and get our construction manager stuff, contracts and stuff approved next month, we really have to make a decision on where we're going. So any information that I can help provide, or I know that Lon would provide, questions that you might have.
when is the decision going to be on our agenda?
If the council is resolute and ready to move forward, you could have a motion directing staff to proceed with one way or the other on Thursday. Otherwise, you'd be looking at the first council series of meetings in December.
Yeah.
Anybody have reservations about that?
Need to let the library board know what direction we're voting on.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you, council.
And just to let the council know, we will be adding a receive and file for Thursday. The city has been receiving some correspondence from Charlie Knutson related to balancing ward sizes in light of the growth in the community.
Okay. Budget guidelines?
Good evening. I'm not sure if they do it by alphabetical order because my first name is Zach, my last name is Wolf, but here I am before you at the end of the night, so I'll try to keep it lively and go through quickly. If I can get this started. Thank you, Rachel. Very quickly. Right there. Yeah. While that keys up.
Yep.
All Last month, we had a discussion regarding the budget calendar for FY21. We mentioned in November, and here we are now, talking about guidelines. What the guidelines are is the opportunities for us to discuss some of the major assumptions that we'll be building the recommended budget through, so that when we present that budget to you in January, we have an idea, or you have an idea of how it's being built, what are the underlying assumptions, and then if you have any questions about it today, that would give us indication as to how should we be building it, as well as we have one decision point regarding property taxes, being it's one of the large components of our general fund revenue. So some of the general guidelines, first of all, we'll be adopting a balanced and sustainable general fund budget. Our general fund budget's revenue will equal expenditures. So where some of the other budgets, depending upon projects and use of fund balances, come into play, the general fund budget, best practice is you adopt a balanced budget, even though we have a healthy reserve, and that's our intention for this next year as well. Also looking to move forward with the target of continuing the target reserve rate of 35% of expenditures. We've currently held that in place for the last couple years, and like to also mention one of the great features we do have as a city as we built this out is knowing that there's a potential recession looming somewhere out there. We're now in the largest expansion in the history of the U.S. At some point there will be either a market correction, as Councilman Sternard mentioned the other day, or a full-on recession. So it's one of the great fiscal practices that the City of Marion does currently have in place. Secondly, just wanted to mention that general fund reserve of anything above 35% and the 35% itself as a reserve would only be used for one-time expenditure. So once again, it's not used to supplant any ongoing funding, nor any dollars above that 35% that we would bring in would we ever look to put it towards one-time or ongoing items. Fourth on the list is operating expenditures for active CIP projects. We'll also be including the operating budget, and what that means is with the number of capital projects we do have coming on board over the next couple of years, each year as we're going into the opening of those buildings or those new projects going forward, we want to make sure we have sufficient operating funds set aside to fund it. For example, the fire station, there's been care and attention to make sure that there was a phasing in of additional firefighters over the last couple of years, so that with fire station headquarters coming online, we'll be able to fully staff that fire station. And then lastly, just mentioning there, where possible, advancing strategic planning goals. So property taxes. Why is property tax such a large focal point of us during the budget? Well, one, it represents 81% of our general fund revenue. That's a lot of money. That's about that's over $19 million that we have, in our last year's budget was about $24 million. So that's going to be the largest component we're looking at on our revenue side of what we need to do this next year. And also politically, as you know, that's one of the large decisions that's made on what are we going to be setting that levy rate. Just breaking up the components of what's in that property tax formula, broke it up into three pieces so we can discuss each one separately and talk about some of those underlying assumptions. One, the valuation. So we start with the valuation that the county assessor puts together. Later, actually passes on to the county auditor here, and they do any exemptions and any credits. You put in the rollback on top of it, and then you add the levy rate. Now you have baked together your property taxes for the next year. So on the valuation side, one of the things that I'm forecasting that it's going to be another strong year is if you look at the numbers, it's probably easier to see in front of you. The numbers to the right are the 2018 assessed property tax valuations. Now it says 2018 because there's 2 years in arrear for they use there, so that's fiscal year 20. Those are the total valuations without adding any exemptions on top of it or removing any of the credits on top of it as well. So you'll see there a total of about $2.8 million in total valuation. And then moving over to the left-hand side of what they've put together, and these are actual numbers of the valuation. Once again, they're not, they haven't gone through the baking process to strip away the other pieces. But we've seen very healthy increases with residential of 7.9%. Growth there, commercial 16.9%, industrial 42.4%. We're really excited, excuse me, to see the commercial and industrial. As you know, we're heavily dependent on residential here in Marion, but the other two property classes, they get assessed at a higher rate. So they get assessed at a 90% assessment rate rather than the rollback rates around the mid-50s that residential brings into place. Also, it helps to diversify the types of property classes that we're taxing against in the city. So it's a good piece to see that's moving forward. On the estimate that I have right now is that I expect it to be somewhere between 6 and 8% growth in valuations, and that would be actually the growth that we would receive in assessed valuations, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So of that 9.5% at the bottom, I don't expect that to go forward. And one of the reasons is Leanne presented really well today, is the TIF side of it too. So in addition to some of the exemptions, the other pieces, for the growth of the commercial and industrial, there have been TIF agreements in place in order to jumpstart some of these projects and get them moving into the city. So that would be one of the major components that would then take away that valuation while they're getting the TIF rebates or the different incentive package, and later to be brought back into the tax roll at their full amount. So next piece is roll-in back. On the rollback, residential, the first one on the list, when I was reviewing a couple things back here before the presentation, there's a slight change on FY20, so it's 9.9180 instead of 97. Sorry, number guys, I gotta make sure numbers are correct. But what we're seeing this next year, because these are final rollback numbers, is residential went down. So what that means is if you had a house that's valued at say 100,000, that you're going to be paying this next year on 55% of that is your valuation rate, where the year before was 56%. Now, mind you, the way it works in Iowa is properties are reassessed every 2 years, and they're reassessed on the odd year. So we are on the odd year this year, and that's one of the reasons why one of the reasons why we had such a large valuation increase is because these are the reassessment year. The other year would be the pickup of new properties coming on board, but you'd have the same valuation for 2 years in a row with maybe some slight adjustments there. Multi-residential, just to call out there, it is continuing to decrease, and that's statutorily mandated. It's going to, after, I believe it's FY23, when it comes parallel with residential. So it will eventually get into the mid-50s, presuming that's where residential stays. Commercial and industrial are fixed, and agricultural shot up significantly from last year in the mid-50s, very close to residential, to the high 80s. So what does that mean for the total dollars? Looking at a flat rate, the 14.22338 that we adopted this last year, if it comes in the range of 6% to 8%, we'd be expecting somewhere in the line of about 1.18 million to 1.57 million in additional revenue coming in year over year. One of the things is excluded in there is debt service, because mind you, our debt service levy is held separately, meaning that though it makes up the entire amount that we have in the 14.22, it's not capped on top of it. It's not capped, so we can levy against the different properties or the different debt instruments we utilize here. And also, it doesn't go back into the general fund. It goes into the debt service fund. So just want to mention, this is only the general fund portion of it. I put in red below there. Lon had a good recommendation saying, let's also look at a pessimistic scenario. Mind you, property taxes are assessed 2 years in arrears, so this will be going forward at this higher rate. But if we were in a recessionary period where property taxes were impacted, or was the state to move forward and make certain changes, say cap it at a 3% rate, we'd be looking at, rather than going from over $1 million to $590,000. So a pretty drastic cut there. Now looking at the next scenario down, what that shows is, let's say there's a flat rate of 14.22338. What if we did a 1% increase? And a 1% increase is about 14 cents increase we'd have there. That would bring in about another $246,000 to $250,000 in revenue. And similarly, if we did 2% increase and the percentages match out, we go up, we're getting to 492 and 501. Reason for bringing this up, and one of the things we'll be asking in this presentation today, is your thoughts about the property tax levy. Should we keep it flat as we're modeling it for the recommended budget? Should we look at a 1% or a 2% change? I'll also have in one of the later slides too what the implications of that is on the assessment per 100,000 for property owners. So that portion of it as well. Just a reminder that we went through last time, so I won't go into the details of it, but there's a requirement this year in the public hearing in the maximum property tax rate of 2%. Going to go into the last bullet there. When I modeled it out on the FY20 numbers, if the city was to decide, or council was to decide, that we do want to keep it at the 2% threshold, that would have meant last year we would have left $579,000 of unrealized property taxes, even at a flat rate. So it's one of the major points too that also in discussions to see your thoughts on that, because it does require 2/3 majority vote to pass a 2% maximum levy.
So Zach, so the 2%, again, so we got to get used to this new 2% threshold. So is the 2% computed on the increase in our levy rate?
Increase on the total dollars that we bring in
Total dollars
for those levy
in.
categories. Yes. Yeah, debt service is not one of them, but the majority of the other the levies that we bring in are subject to that 2% maximum.
Got it.
For the state legislature impact, also in the budget we'll be building into that the continuance of what's considered the backfill. Backfill was put into place, I believe, in 2017 when they made changes to commercial and industrial assessment rates, and it was placed there to backfill the impact to cities. They've been doing it in annual appropriations. We don't know if that would be changed year over year, so that's really a decision not the legislature, but for us. It was 463 this last year. With our growth this year, expecting it to be modeled probably a little closer to 500,000. Of that, I think about almost 400,000 comes in the general fund. So if that were not to go forward, that would be a significant hit for us. And we won't know about that until later on the legislative session, unfortunately.
Too late.
Yes. We're expecting no additional property tax limitations imposed as well. Once again, the league is preparing their briefs to make sure that there aren't any future limitations put on cities on local control around this. But given what was done last year, and it was tempered at the end of the year from some of the original proposals, we wouldn't be surprised if we see something move through this year. And then what would potentially be done this year would have then implications next year, because the base, usually they cap at the base from the prior year. So it's just something to keep in mind. On the compensation side for salaries, as you know, we're working currently on a class and compensation study, which we expect to get the results of that at the end of December or early January. We'll be using the data provided for that to understand where do we sit with market, to see it as a recommendation of how much of an increase would be proposed in the budget for next year. In the meantime, we're waiting for those numbers. I'm including in there modeling at 2.8%. It's close to what we used last year, and it also aligns with the bargaining units, what we have for police. We currently have the fire contract in place, and we're in the last year of the police contract. One of the things I want to mention there is also we're going to be realizing additional costs for new positions last year. Since we funded certain positions mid-year, there's about $320,000 of unfunded, or $320,000 of dollars not in the budget in FY20 that will need to be added in FY21, because when we put in the budget, that's only half of the position for some of them. As you might recall, 2-3 of the firefighters we have in there, I want to say it's February, we have them at their start date. So we only have about 4 months of their actual position costs in this year's budget. The total cost will need to be realized this next year. Also, one of the things to note, I don't have in the slide, but just so you understand what it costs to run with the current staffing complement we have, it's around $600,000 to $700,000, a little close to $700,000, to move forward the current staff we have at about a 2.8%, at a 2.8% increase on salaries. That also is taken into account us increasing some of the health benefits premium at a 6% rate there. But as we grow as an organization, the cost just to continue year over year will continue to increase. So that's one of the reasons why we are looking at considering what would be the implications of doing a 1 to 2% increase on the property tax rate. On benefits, we contract with Gallagher. They are consultants that help us understand how we're doing with our self-insured plans that we do have. Similarly to our reserve rate, we have a very well-funded reserve. And with that, this last year, Gallagher, they recommended that we were to actually cut rates based upon their straight line projections of where they saw us trending with our utilization, as well as us trending with the utilization and where we're at with those rates. So we decided this last year to keep rates flat. In FY20, we did not increase health premiums. But looking at the figures that they're coming forward with now, with some of the projections and their inflationary pieces, they use as a 6% inflationary rate on medical year over year. That's their average rate they use. They're recommending that we would increase the rate somewhere between 10 to 13%. So it's a significant jump from where we currently are at. We'll be meeting with Wellmark in the next couple weeks to also get their data points and try to triangulate into it to say, okay, Gallagher says here, Wellmark says here, how do we show we're trending as well? Because one of the other pieces, just to bear in mind, is our plan is on a calendar year. So if you don't already know, if you've got close to your deductible, now is the time to get the last things done because you're only doing a co-insurance amount rather than having to pay into the other side of it. I'm speaking because I'm thinking about an MRI, so I'm not looking to help that personally. Overall piece, but that's one of the areas we look through December. We'll get a better indication of where we're going to end the year and how those trends look from last year to this year, which will help us to figure out where should we move it this next year. But our recommendation will be an increase to that rate. And then retirement rates, fortunately we've had little increase there. IPERS is expecting to have another good year, and even in their modeling for their actuarial assessments, they would expect to be at a 9.44% for the next coming years, even with some dips in the current market. So that's where they haven't published their rates yet, but that's where we're looking to put it. Municipal police and fire, unfortunately, we are going to see an increase this next year of a 3.7% of not total percentage points, but it's going from about 24 and change to the 25%. So there is an increase there. So looking at some of the other revenue categories, we have some good news on the horizon. The lost revenue, one of the changes done this last year in the legislature in Iowa is also to require that online sales tax be collected. So we expect that to be an increase as well that we would see on lost. So the 1% lost tax revenue is required to be collected going forward as well. We don't know the total impact for that yet, but just knowing how the purchasing market is going from the brick and mortars to the online sector, we're excited about the potential growth in that area. Also in road use. Road use had we get road use figures from I think IDOT, learning all the acronyms here, and IDOT revised their figures for this next year, and it went up considerably, about 5%. Usually we only see less than a 1% increase year over year what they're looking at. But with looking at electronic vehicles and adding those to the rolls as well, they're expecting it to go up, which would mean for us, even at a slightly conservative estimate, or tapered down estimate from there is about 4.7, so about a $200,000 pickup, which would be really great to have available for different projects. And then lastly, hotel motel. Everyone knows the new hotel going in. I just learned, I call it the Marriott because I stayed there. GLD doesn't. They didn't have anything up there, said GLD Marriott. But knowing it's in place and it was busy when I was there, that's my kind of one-person assessment when my family stayed there for 2.5 weeks. Unfortunately, we don't have the figures yet of what the impact for that is yet. I called someone at the state and they mentioned that they don't have as they were finalizing some paperwork, we didn't get them in the first quarter, but we expect our next quarter payment, we believe will be received this month. So we should get an indication of how that additional revenue is going to impact going forward with our hotel motel revenue. But that would put us above $200,000 a year.
Well, it's not reflected in this.
Last year's budget was 190, so I just put in there 200 plus because I still don't know what that impact will be, if it will take us closer to 250. So I'm waiting for that first payment to understand what we've got. And then once again, That's during the time period where we did have Prospect Meadows open. It's going prior to the dip in the season usually is the next 2 quarters.
I think before the hotel opened up, wasn't it around 150, 160, if I remember?
Yeah, it was about, we usually budgeted between 150 and 162
Right.
and for revenue year
Without
over year.
the hotel.
Yeah.
Without the new one.
Without the new hotel, yeah.
So just a quick review, and this is the same calendar that I presented last month, but today we're talking about budget guidelines. In January, the 24th and 27th, we'll have budget work sessions to talk about capital improvement budget as well as the operating budget. February 18th is the tentative budget presentation to City Council with the public hearing on maximum property taxes on March 5th, looking for the finalization of the budget on March 19th. And mind you, that this year, or now going forward, March 31st is the new deadline. So the decision point, which is more so for discussion with council, mind you, you're not going through the public hearing today, but it would help provide us direction as we're putting together the budget. Or what are your thoughts on this next year of having a flat property tax rate or the potential of increasing it by 1 to 2%? As I mentioned beforehand, 1% increase would take us about another 250,000. 2% would take us to 500,000, and then the impact to the impact per 100,000 is before you, where it's about an $8 difference depending upon where you're going from that assessment level. And I would open that up for discussion. I guess the second point too, looking to open up, which apologies for not having a slide on that, is also in that discussion is to talk about too the maximum property tax hearing. Because if there was the interest in not doing that, that would significantly change how we would be building the budget. Because rather than looking at even going to a flat property tax rate, that would be reduction. That would be rather than looking over $1 million of an expected revenue this next year, that would be talking about closer to 500,000, which would not cover which would not cover our expected costs at a 2.8% increase and also increase in our premium rates.
Go ahead.
Ooh, I will start. And this may get lengthy here, but I'm going to try to keep it abbreviated. How realistic do you think on your property tax valuations we are on the residential for 2019? As we move forward, we've got a lot of residential property that's going to be rolling in on our tax base. Obviously, with these new developments coming in there, are you feeling pretty strong that that's a realistic number? And what do you think that growth is going to be as we project out one more year? Because I'm just thinking of these neighborhoods that where all this new construction and obviously it's going to get to the point where we are going to start to see those taxes coming on the base for the city there.
You know what, the out-year projections, I'm still putting together a model on the out-year projections. Unfortunately, there's a lot of complexity in the tax systems in Iowa, and since they're broken up by different jurisdictions, I've been in contact with each of Department of Management, the Lynn County Assessor, as well as the county auditor, and each one has disparate systems, so it's hard to get it streamlined. That to say, I don't have a good outgrowth model for future years as I'm building out. I currently have a 5-year forecast that I'm building out that will be part of this next budget cycle, and in that I've been conservative. I'm looking out years 3%, and the reason being is because also with the league indicating that there may be pressure to do continued tax limitations, though I think we would have the ability to continue to grow, especially with the 2-year lag. I'm not sure what could potentially be put into place where next year we could be capped at a certain amount of increase. That's in the hands of the legislature. So all that to say, this year I'm estimating it to be somewhere around the upper 7s. But one of the other things in the sophistication of the model, which Councilman Jensen was talking about the other day, of iterations of 5-year forecast, is getting TIF better in there. Because as we have more sophisticated models with understanding the TIF side to the other piece, we can get closer on those projections. Right now, unfortunately, I don't have a model that can show that.
And that's okay. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, just because that's always in the back of my mind. I know we got these areas of the community. Another thing that I was shocked to see the numbers on, my day job allows me to work with the agriculture, so looking at our model from going from 2018 to 2019 on the agricultural land and buildings, residential dwellings on agricultural land, it just reminds me that when we do take a look at annexation and taking a look at those zoned areas that are within the city limits, when we prematurely go out there and bring that in and we take these things off the tax base, these are hard numbers, and then it takes again years for us to get back to collecting a tax base off of that same property. So one thing that we should kind of keep in the back of our mind, that growth of us taking some of these things off those tax rolls do implicate some of these things that they come back. Third thing is healthcare. Something that I would be a huge component of, and that would be is to never have a flat year in healthcare premiums. The health insurance industry, even the health providers, United Healthcare, Blue Cross Blue Shield, all of those companies have a built-in mechanism so that they have retained premiums, so that if they cannot get through the insurance commissioner a increase to healthcare premiums, that they can put those into reserves to help buy down increases in future years. So if they were projecting a 16% increase and the state only approves a 15%, then they can come back and buy down that increase by maybe 1 or 2%. I think that we would want to make sure we roll that back down to the local level. With us being a self-insured program or a funded model, we would want to build those mechanisms in there. Again, too, the only reason I say that is because our healthcare premiums for our employees are ridiculously cheap. A 50-year-old couple, husband and wife, would be looking at anywhere between $1,400 and $1,700 a month for healthcare on the outside in the individual marketplace. That's the insurance that I'm writing today. So our employees who are getting their healthcare for $50 a month is extremely cheap, and that's a component that cannot be replaced. So I would just make sure that we constantly are taking a look at, even if we felt that there was a no increase, a 3 to 5% increase would be a conservative model to make sure that the city stays on the front side of that. Otherwise, it would get upside down real quick. Right. The second component to that is we have a very high retention level to our employees. So we don't have turnover in the city of Marion. So we know what our nutrition is for our health, the health of our employees. And if we did find ourselves in a growth mode or a high turnover rate and we start hiring in with pre-existing conditions that would be high utilization healthcare, we would see those costs jump staggeringly. So I would say take advantage of where we're at on these good years. But thank you. This is very comprehensive. There's a lot more built into this. I know that we really banged on the budget last year. We imposed the franchise fees to try to make sure that we could maintain flat levy taxes on the property. I know it's going to be difficult for us to have that same conversation this year. So thanks for all the work put into this, and I'll be looking forward to more coming up.
Other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so you asked us what we think, what our opinions are.
Right.
As I sit here today, and there's a heck of a lot more to come into the equation, again, I think one of the key components that I continue to look for is what Randy already referred to as the franchise tax fee. So this next fiscal year is going to be the first full year to include that. If I recall, that was estimated at around $3 million. So that was
$1 million. Yep.
Oh, $1 million?
Correct. It brought an additional $1 million we get in
my
franchise
mistake.
fees. About $300,000 before, and so now we get another additional $1 million.
So $1 million for a year. Okay.
Correct.
So we got that component. We got the growth component. The one area that I personally believe we need to look at for an added expense when you talk about accelerating some of the strategic plan initiatives, the one that I would consider that needs additional funding, and some of it we took out this last year, is additional expenditures committed for improvements of our roads. We talked about that being one of the major ones. The citizen survey indicated that that is the top item in which they would be willing to pay property taxes for property tax increases. That said, I would still like to see an increase on that, but if I look at the other components, the growth that we have, the full amount for the franchise fee and some of the other areas, I would still like to stay at least at a flat amount. So again, that's very, very high level, but that's all we have today to look at until we start coming back with more components of that. We start talking about new employees we're going to bring on board. Again, you talk about capital projects, how much of that we're going to be able to really complete and do in the next fiscal year as well. So, but that's my high-level comments.
Okay.
Questions, comments, anybody?
More than anything, I was thinking, right, is the commercial property. I have an interest there, and we were promised a rollback, by the governor, and I don't see anything to indicate that's true. And the new property certainly will catch up with it. But in the meantime, property like some of it in the 1888s are going to carry the load. And that's very difficult, very, very difficult to rent and get the kind of rent out of property of that age that you would need. So I think we got a little problem there.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, Councilman Draper, it's one of the difficulties in being so reliant on property taxes. We do now have the franchise fees, which is the costs that are associated with the utilization of the electric and gas comes into place at the next quarter. So we get that almost immediate returns, and also that's much quicker than the 2-year lag that we do on property taxes. And being a growing community, that's one of the areas that the lagging, we're heavily dependent on a 2-year lag for getting in the majority of our general fund revenue. So with the growth pressures that we're getting as a city, that's where some of the options we're looking to put forth in the budget this year would be to look at what would it be at a 1% and 2% to address some of those infrastructure internally, as well as some of the hard infrastructure in the community, and addressing that, and then trying to look at it and say how equitable is it too, because we're seeing other cities as well. One of the things, I didn't want to get too deep into it today, but we can also show where the tax rates landed for our comparison communities as well, to see where we sit with that, to start thinking about too, as we grow out as Marion, what might we want to invest in now in order to continue it moving forward. But once again, that gets into the the expenditure side more so, and department budgets. The first budget's not due till next week, so that's where also we'll be hearing from departments to see where do they sit. We're seeing the needs from their perspective, as they're the experts in their field, to say we would like to have investments in these areas to move forward these initiatives. So that will be the other side of it, which we'll be bringing to.
And just to add a little context, typically we will get our estimate of rates from Wellmark in December to use for budgetary purposes. We have Gallagher take a look at those as well, independently of Wellmark, because they can get a little more sophisticated with their model. And to one of the points that Councilman Sternad raised earlier, we do have a reserve that we carry because we are self-funded, and so we do have the ability year over year to be able to moderate some of those rate increases if we anticipate that one year we might have a very significant one, but then the outlook for the next year looks a little bit better. If you look historically at our claims data, right now Gallagher is giving us numbers based off of 3, maybe 4 months worth of experience during this fiscal year, but that's not really as Zach alluded to, that's also one of our higher utilization periods because people have met their out-of-pocket deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums, and so we'll have closer to a half year worth of data by the time Wellmark gets around to giving us the rates.
Can I just piggyback? I want a great comment on that, Lon. And one thing I want to add to that too is when we see with anything, I just want to make sure we're putting some relevancy to this, but let's say a single premium employee is, the rate is $600 for that policy. A 10% increase today would make it $660, right?
Correct. 10%
next year would not be $60 more. So as we take a look at those, and as we take a look, 10% this year, 10% next year, 10%. That 10% just totally got inflated so out of whack that, year over year over year, you just think, oh, 10%, 10%. But it's a carried forward 10%. So, and it's not just healthcare; it's everything that we're talking about here. So I think it's a very key component. When we see something and it's only 3%, only 5%. Think about the accrued costs and increases. Same thing, salaries, wages, all types of benefits, everything that rolls into that. So,
yeah, that's something we really do keep a close eye on because, as you're familiar with, the provisions under the Affordable Care Act for the Cadillac plan, about how many years based on those type of increases would it be before virtually every family plan in the U.S. now falls underneath the Cadillac plan tax. So that's something we really have to keep a close eye on.
Zach, just for clarification,
Please.
in the total valuation, the portion that is attributable to residential dwellings on agricultural land and agricultural land, the dip in that could be that that land is now classified as residential,
Correct.
and it's been developed.
Correct.
Or commercial or
That is
industrial,
correct.
whatever. It's become developed land. It was ag land. Okay, so that, I think probably a lot of that is that, right? I mean, well, most of it.
That was in speaking to Lon, because Lon helped me give more context to this, because mind you, we get them at the aggregate level and not the detail level, but that was one of the first observations Lon also mentioned too, with our growth into certain areas, that we would expect that over time to take the ag.
Going to
land
have less
and
ag
move it.
land in the city as it's all being developed. Yeah, thanks. Okay, other questions?
One other piece I just put before the council, just to see barometer on it, is anyone leaning towards not passing the 2% maximum levy? Because once again, if that were the case, that would be, rather than looking at a flat tax rate and potentially being able to recapture the increase in evaluation that we have as a growing city, that would cut that in about half. So that would be a major structural shift, and we'd have to think about that very seriously. And it takes only 2 council members in order to not have that go through. I'm just looking to see if anyone has any serious concerns about that with the new language of wanting to keep that forward, because if so, that would be okay.
I don't have any concerns, and I also, too, am interested in keeping it flat at this point based
Okay.
on the information we have. That could change as we get more information.
Correct.
Okay with the 2%, but looking at the flat rate currently,
Okay.
that's where I am.
Okay. Well, then, and going forward and building it, I'll, as I mentioned, definitely looking to build it with the parameters from council. What would it be looking at it flat, but also looking at if we were to increase it, what areas could we potentially go into, so you understand, too, the cost benefit of moving into it as a secondary option. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for all your work on this. Okay. We do have a closed session on the agenda.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the closed session regarding litigation as permitted under Section 21.51C of the Code of Iowa.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded to adjourn to closed session regarding litigation as permitted under the Code of Iowa. May we have the legal opinion, please?
Yes, Your Honor. I have familiarized myself with the contents of this proposed closed session. I do believe that it does fall within Iowa Code Section 21.5, subparagraph 1, subparagraph C, and recommend that the council adjourn accordingly to closed session.
Okay. Any discussion before we vote? Roll call, please.
Mr. Draper?
Yes.
Ms. Atkins? Yes. Mr. Jensen?
Yes.
Mayor Abawasley?
Yes.
Mr. Sternad?
Yes.
Mr. Brandt?
Yes.
Okay, we're adjourned to closed session. We'll return to open session upon completion. Thank you all for joining us.